Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
The heat in the kitchen was the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you forget what it feels like to be cool again. I was standing at the grill, plating the last two ribeyes of the night, when Jordan, our newly minted owner, sauntered in like he was about to offer me front row tickets to a rock show instead of what came next. He wore that smug little half smile, the kind you see on finance bros right before they tell you your 401k's evaporated. "Mike," he said, leaning against the cooler like he belonged there, "can I talk to you in the office for a minute?" That was my first red flag. Jordan never stepped into the kitchen unless it was to show off to his girlfriend or tell someone to stop playing classic rock on the Bluetooth speaker. So I wiped my hands on a towel, handed the plates off to the runner, and followed him back like a damn fool walking into his own funeral. The office still had my name on the whiteboard from the shift schedule I'd written that morning. I hadn't even erased it yet. Jordan sat behind the desk, my desk, and folded his hands like a cheap villain from a made-for-TV movie. "Listen," he started, and I swear to God, that one word had more oil on it than the fryer in back. "You've been here a long time, and no one's questioning your dedication." The way he said it, you knew exactly what came next. "But the industry's changing," he continued. "We're moving toward a younger, more dynamic team. More social media savvy, more adaptable. And I've got to be honest with you, you've become something of a liability at your age." At my age, I didn't say anything right away. Didn't yell, didn't curse. I just stared at him like I was trying to figure out whether he actually believed what he was saying or if he was just reading off a script from some seminar about how to fire people without getting sued. A liability. That's what he called me. Never mind the 23 years I'd spent keeping that kitchen running when the plumbing broke, or the power went out, or half the staff called in hungover. Never mind that I trained 3 out of 4 of the cooks working the line that night. Never mind that it was my recipes that made that duck confit their best seller and kept the food critics off our backs. I untied my apron slowly, like it was the last thing keeping me from losing it. Jordan just sat there, fingers tapping on the desk like he was waiting for me to cry or beg or break something. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I folded my apron, set it gently on the chair, and said, "I'll grab my things." He nodded like he was doing me a favor, like I should thank him for not making a scene in front of the staff. When I walked out through the kitchen, everything stopped for half a second. The sizzle of pans, the clatter of dishes, it all just froze. Nobody said a word. Not Pete, who I trained from a dishwasher into a halfway decent sauté guy. Not Carla, who used to call me Uncle Mike and bring me ginger tea when I lost my voice. Not even Dave, the lifer bartender who knew more of my secrets than my wife did. All of them kept their eyes on their stations like if they looked at me, they'd catch whatever corporate disease had infected Jordan's brain. I packed up what little I had left, a framed photo of me and Linda at the soft opening 12 years ago, a coffee mug that said Grill Sergeant, and my black leather-bound notebook with every recipe I'd ever created or tweaked scribbled in my own shorthand. That notebook was my legacy, and I wasn't about to leave it behind for some kid with a culinary degree and an Instagram following. As I walked out through the alley, the late summer air hit me like a slap. Hot, sticky, and mean, just like the conversation I just had. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just kept walking. But deep down, something ugly started to take root. Not rage, not yet. More like a cold, quiet betrayal. Like being cheated on by someone who smiled in your face every day. You know, I always thought if I ever left that place, it'd be on my terms. I thought maybe I'd retire, maybe open a tiny roadside joint with my wife where we'd serve barbecue to bikers and snowbirds and live out our golden years in peace. I didn't think it would happen like this. No warning. No thank you, just you're old and in the way. Hell, Jordan didn't even ask me to train my replacement. That's how little he thought of me. But here's the thing, Jordan. He didn't know what he'd just done. He thought I'd just disappear. Fade into retirement like an old dish that got taken off the menu. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I had a few ingredients left in my pocket. The kind you don't write down. The kind that come in handy when people forget who taught them everything they know. What would you do if your boss smiled in your face for months, called you a mentor, and then threw you out like expired stock? Would you take it on the chin and move on? Or would you let that betrayal marinate, low and slow, until it turned into something unforgettable? I didn't know it then, but this was just the first course. And Jordan, he was about to get served. I didn't sleep much that first night, not because I was worried about money. Though let's be honest, anyone in their late 50s who says they're not is either rich or lying. but because there's something deeply humiliating about being discarded, like the worn-out soles of your own boots you kept just in case, and then one day finally toss without ceremony. I lay in bed next to Linda, staring at the ceiling fan like it held answers I couldn't reach. She didn't say much, just held my hand like she did when her father passed, like grief and fury and shame were things you didn't need to explain. By the second day, I was already climbing the walls. I've never been the kind of man who does well with stillness. The house was too quiet, the coffee too hot, and the couch too soft for my body, which had spent decades toughening up against the sharp corners of a commercial kitchen. The ache in my back reminded me of every double shift I pulled, every Friday night rush where I didn't eat, every holiday I gave up so the restaurant could keep feeding strangers. All that sacrifice, and now I was just home, jobless, forgettable. Linda, bless her, tried to stay cheerful. She made me eggs and poured the coffee and told me this might be the universe making room for something new. I love my wife, but I didn't need the universe's room. I needed a damn job. By day 3, I'd stopped checking my email. Every message I opened felt like a mirror held to a version of myself that no longer existed. A chef without a kitchen. A man without a trade. I even tried rewriting my resume. But what do you put down when all you've done for 23 years is build someone else's dream and then get shown the door for doing it too well, too long, and apparently too old? Linda's brother Stan called me that night. Said he heard what happened through the grapevine. One of his old high school friends eats at the place regularly and mentioned my departure. Stan's the health inspector for the county, the kind of guy who keeps a ledger in his mind and never forgets a name, a code violation, or a slight. He didn't offer sympathy, didn't ask for the whole story, just said, "They always had a reputation for pushing the limits. Especially with you gone, I'll keep an eye out." And then he hung up, like he already had something cooking. You see, Stan and I have never been best pals, but we respect each other, which counts for something when most people can't look you in the eye anymore. He's the kind of guy who believes in standards, the boring, important kind. Sanitation protocols, temperature logs, rodent control, the kind of details that never made it into Jordan's Instagram posts about elevated fusion concepts and culinary disruption. On the 4th day, I decided to walk past the restaurant. I took the long way, the one that curves around the back alley where the deliveries come in and the staff takes smoke breaks during lunch rush. I didn't stop, didn't linger, just watched from the corner of my eye as a new cook I didn't recognize hauled in a delivery crate labeled wrong side up. That alone told me everything I needed to know. No one checking labels. No one respecting the chain of command. The cracks were already forming. And I hadn't even lifted a finger. That night, I found myself flipping through my old black recipe notebook, the one I took from the office on my way out, and not out of spite, but because it was mine, damn it. Every page held a story, a memory, a tweak that took a dish from decent to unforgettable. My dry rub for the ribs came to me after a night of bourbon and insomnia. The duck confit? Refined over 5 winters until the skin crisped just right without drying out the meat. These weren't just recipes. They were pieces of my life, scattered on lined paper and stained with olive oil and effort. I sat at the table for hours, running my fingers along the margins, remembering which pages were scrawled in panic during dinner rushes and which were written slowly, during the rare quiet moments when the kitchen hummed like a well-oiled machine. These were things Jordan couldn't replace with a cheaper sous chef or an influencer-approved rebrand. You can buy labor. You can't buy legacy. And then, just before bed, as I closed the notebook, I remembered something Stan once told me over Thanksgiving dinner, back when we still carved turkeys like enemies and not friends. Sometimes the best way to expose rot, he said, is to stop hiding it with fresh paint. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't have a plan. Not yet. But I did have time. And I had memory. And more importantly, I had eyes in places Jordan didn't even know existed. See, when you've worked in a place for over 2 decades, you don't just know where the knives are kept. You know where the cracks run in the tile behind the dishwasher, where the mold gathers when no one cleans behind the soda line, which inspectors don't check the grease trap, and which ones do. I wasn't ready to strike, not yet. But I was done licking wounds. Something had shifted. The betrayal was no longer just a private wound. It was becoming a blueprint. Jordan had made a critical mistake. He assumed I'd go quietly. He didn't realize I was just beginning to stir. A week after I got canned, I started hearing whispers, The kind of second-hand kitchen gossip that always seems to drift back toward you if you've earned enough loyalty over the years to be remembered, even after you've been shoved out the door like expired scallops. The first call came from Pete, the sauté guy who'd once nearly set himself on fire trying to flambe without turning off the hood vent, and who I'd personally trained out of being a walking OSHA violation. He called late, after a shift, voice hushed like he was confessing to a priest. "Mike," he said, "it's bad in there. Real bad. Jordan's trying to run the place like a TikTok kitchen. He's got these new guys from some culinary incubator in Brooklyn, and they're screwing up everything: recipes, inventory, timing, you name it." He paused, and I could hear the clink of his lighter as he lit up a cigarette outside the back door, same way he always did. "They're messing with your rub. That dry spice you used on the ribs? Replaced it with some store-bought stuff in a vacuum bag. Customers are noticing." I didn't say much, just thanked him and told him to stay sharp, which is the closest I come to giving a blessing. But after I hung up, I sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the salt shaker like it owed me answers, thinking about how fragile reputation is when it's not yours anymore. They hadn't just fired me. They were dismantling everything I'd built, brick by brick, and trying to pretend it had always been that way. 3 days later, Carla texted me from the walk-in cooler, where she was hiding from a screaming match between Jordan and one of the new pastry hires. The tirade was about flour inventory, of all things. Apparently, someone had forgotten to rotate the sacks, and mice had chewed into the oldest ones. Carla knew better than to report it directly. Management had started punishing people for negativity on shift. She just wanted me to know. "It's gonna blow," she wrote. "We miss you." I still didn't move. Not yet. I'm not a man who strikes while angry. That's how you end up with regrets. But I started thinking like a chef again, not just about food, but about timing. Every dish, every move in a kitchen relies on perfect timing. Let the meat rest too long, and it's cold. Pull it too early, and it bleeds. Revenge, as it turns out, works the same way. That same night, I invited Stan over for dinner, nothing fancy, just burgers on the grill and a six-pack on the porch. He's not the chatty type, and I'm not the begging type, but I knew how to plant seeds. As we ate, I told him everything I remembered about that place. Not the emotional stuff, that was for me, but the physical rot. The clogged grease trap they never fixed because it cost too much to shut down the line for even one night. The leaking ceiling tile and dry storage that dripped rainwater right into the flour bins during storms. The ancient fridge in the prep area that always hovered dangerously close to health code minimums and needed a sharp kick to stay shut. I didn't ask him to do anything. I didn't have to. Stan just nodded, occasionally grunting between bites. He doesn't make promises, but when he took out his phone and typed a few notes into some app one couldn't see, I knew something had clicked. He wasn't doing it for me. He was doing it for the job, the rules, the sanctity of cleanliness and safety. But I also think, somewhere in that stone face, he didn't like seeing his sister's husband kicked around like garbage. Some loyalties run deeper than they look. The next morning, while I was drinking my second cup of coffee and reading a local article about rising fusion trends, which, unsurprisingly, featured a smiling photo of Jordan holding a plate he absolutely didn't create, I got another text. This time from Dave the bartender. Short and sharp. "Health inspector just called asking about open complaints. Thought you should know." That's when I felt it. The shift. The first crack of lightning before a summer storm. Stan was moving. Quietly, thoroughly, officially. And me? I didn't lift a finger. But I did take a walk later that afternoon, not past the front door of the restaurant this time, but around the side, where the dumpsters sit behind a half-locked gate. What I saw didn't surprise me, but it made me shake my head. Grease pooling along the concrete, likely from an overflowed trap. A stack of cardboard boxes from some fly-by-night seafood supplier I'd never heard of, all labeled "Flash Frozen. Use immediately." That was never our standard. That was Jordan cutting corners. As I walked away, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt, either. I was something colder, steadier. I felt the kind of focus I used to get right before a big Saturday night service, the moment before the floodgates opened, when everything had to be prepped just right or else fall into chaos. I knew what was coming. I knew Stan. And I knew the building was already rotting from the inside. The real satisfaction wasn't going to be in seeing them fall. It was going to be in knowing I didn't need to lift a hand to push. They'd already done that themselves. It was a Tuesday, dead center of lunch rush, The kind of humid spring day when kitchen steam clings to your arms and the fryer grease seems to settle into your very bones, and the new front-of-house manager. Some poor sap named Bryce who once tried to convince Carla that calling customers "boss babe" was a branding strategy, was already 2 customers deep in complaints when the front door swung open and changed the tempo of everything. Stan walked in slow, not a swagger in sight, just that even, unsmiling pace of a man doing his job by the book, clipboard in hand, plain tin windbreaker zipped to the collar, like he was auditioning for the role of most boring man alive and winning. He didn't introduce himself at first, not to the hostess, not to Bryce, not even to the sweaty teenager on Salad Station who'd been given exactly 3 hours of training before being thrown into weekday lunch service without a second thought. Stan just walked past the hostess stand, right up to the front counter, and said in a calm, matter-of-fact voice that carried more weight than any yelling ever could, "I'm here on a complaint follow-up. I need to speak with management." Now, word of a surprise inspection spreads through a kitchen like a dropped glass. Sudden, sharp, and loud even when unspoken. Jordan came out of his office faster than I'd ever seen him move when I worked there, his smile already plastered on like bad fondant. "Hey, officer." "Oh, Stanley, was it?" Jordan said, extending his hand like this was a networking brunch and not the beginning of the end. Stan didn't shake it. He just looked at Jordan and said, "I'll need to see your most recent sanitation logs, refrigeration temperature records, rodent mitigation schedule, and grease trap service reports. Also, I'd like to speak with Michael Reynolds." Now, if you've ever seen a man get kicked in the gut with words alone, you'd know exactly how Jordan looked at that moment. His eyes did this little flicker thing, like maybe he thought he'd misheard, or maybe hoped that if he smiled harder it would all go away. "Mike Reynolds," he repeated, blinking. "Oh, he doesn't work here anymore." Stan just raised one eyebrow, like a man unimpressed by the obvious, and said, "I'm aware. He's on record as having managed this kitchen's operations for over 20 years. His documentation will be relevant to our assessment. If he's unavailable, that's fine. I'll begin the inspection anyway." From there, it unfolded like a symphony of destruction. Stan started in dry storage, pulling labels off containers, checking expiration dates, scanning the walls for signs of pests. Carla told me later that when he found a bag of flour with what looked like chew marks on the bottom corner, he didn't say a word, just wrote something on his clipboard and moved on. The kitchen froze under his gaze, every cook moving like they were navigating a minefield, hoping they wouldn't be the one to set off a blast. He took temperatures on every refrigeration unit, and when the prep cooler came in at 49 degrees, a full 9 degrees too warm to be safe, he didn't flinch. He just wrote it down, tagged the unit, and told the staff they were required to discard the contents immediately. I imagine the walk-in wasn't much better. I knew that unit like the back of my hand, and unless Jordan had invested in repairs, which I doubted, it was still limping through service on borrowed time and rusted seals. Stan also checked the dish pit, and that's where things got worse. The sanitation logs, which I used to keep meticulously every night before locking up, were clearly being faked, entire weeks filled in with the same handwriting, no staff initials, no timestamped temperatures. When he checked the actual sanitizer levels in the final rinse cycle, they came up short. That's a major violation, not some slap on the wrist stuff. That shut the whole damn thing down territory. Meanwhile, Jordan was sweating harder than the fry cook. He followed Stan around like a nervous substitute teacher hoping the real instructor wouldn't return to see the mess. "You have to understand," he kept saying, "we've been onboarding a new team, streamlining operations. Things may not be perfectly transitioned yet." Stan didn't even look at him. He just asked, "Is that your signature on these logs?" Silence. Outside, customers were starting to notice something was wrong. A few left mid-meal when they saw the inspector tagging equipment. Bryce tried to offer coupons, but no one was biting. The restaurant, once buzzing with clinking glasses and the dull roar of lunch traffic, had gone quiet as the grave. By the time Stan finished, he'd issued 7 separate citations, 1 immediate closure notice for improper food storage, and a scheduled follow-up inspection that would determine whether they'd keep their operating license at all. He posted a bright orange sign on the front door, closed pending health inspection, and walked out without a single glance back. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a photo from Carla. The sign was clear in the frame, with a single note, "He asked for you by name." I sat there for a while, phone in one hand, beer in the other, and let it sink in. Not satisfaction exactly. That would come later, maybe, but something steadier. A kind of quiet validation. The deep, solid feeling that maybe, just maybe, the years I spent sweating and bleeding into that kitchen hadn't vanished the second Jordan took over. They say revenge is best served cold. But this was served by the book, with gloves on and a clipboard in hand. The news traveled faster than I ever could have imagined, not because people cared so much about one restaurant shutting down, but because everyone loves a good downfall when it comes packaged with a side of hypocrisy and a pinch of poetic justice. By the end of the week, the local paper ran a small but pointed piece in the dining section with the headline, "Popular fusion spot shut down by health department, legacy issues cited." And underneath it, a photo of the front door with that orange sign still taped in place like a scarlet letter for the Yelp generation. They didn't mention Jordan by name, not at first, but they didn't have to. Anyone who followed the food scene knew who was steering the ship when it hit the rocks. Yelp lit up like a bonfire on the 4th of July. One-star reviews started rolling in faster than happy hour shots on a Friday night. Some were real, angry customers describing lukewarm fish, watery cocktails, rude staff, long waits. But some were clearly from people who never stepped foot in the place, just piling on because the mob was moving and nobody wants to be the one standing still. Still, there was a kind of dark satisfaction in reading those reviews, not because I wanted the place to fail, but because I wanted the truth to have weight again. I stayed quiet, for the most part. I didn't gloat. I didn't comment. I didn't show up in their DMs or call any old coworkers to say, "Told you so," even though God knows I could have. Instead, I let the storm wash over them while I stayed dry on the porch with a coffee in the morning and a beer at night, watching it all unfold like a man who finally decided he didn't need to be in the kitchen to feel the heat. Then came the interview request. A local food blogger, one of the few who'd ever given me a real handshake instead of a fist bump, reached out through Linda. Said she was writing a piece on the changing face of the restaurant industry, and someone had told her I might have a perspective worth sharing. I didn't jump at it. Took a day or two to think. Talked to Linda about whether it was worth stirring the pot, or if the pot was already boiling over without my help. In the end, I agreed. One interview. No dramatics. No revenge speech. Just facts. We met at a diner. Not some trendy cafe, just a place where the eggs were greasy and the waitress called you Han, without irony. I told her the truth, plain and steady. I told her how I gave more than half my adult life to a place that forgot who built its bones. How I watched young managers arrive with slick shoes and no memory. How I trained them and cleaned up after them, and then got called set in my ways when I didn't want to cut corners. I told her how age wasn't a liability. It was the only thing keeping that place from collapsing under the weight of its own ego. The article ran 2 days later. It didn't go viral, not in the social media sense, but it hit home in a different way. I started getting phone calls from places I used to compete with, old rivals, friendly enemies, former coworkers now running their own kitchens. They wanted to know if I was interested in consulting and training and helping build something that didn't throw its foundation away just because it had a few cracks. I even got an email from a publisher who'd heard about my recipe notebook, asked if I'd be willing to turn it into a cookbook, maybe add a few stories, a few lessons, something honest. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. Jordan, for his part, tried to save face. He posted some bland apology on social media, said the shutdown was due to a transitional oversight, and that the team was working tirelessly to address concerns. No names, no ownership, just empty words stacked like bad hors d'oeuvres on a corporate catering tray. He blamed legacy staff in a leaked internal email, which was rich, considering the only legacy left in that place had been mine, and he'd booted it out like day-old pasta. A week later, someone forwarded me a job listing. Executive chef wanted, full revamp opportunity, immediate hire, must be experienced. The listing was for Jordan's place, still closed, still flailing, still pretending the fire was just a kitchen flare-up and not a full-on structure blaze. I didn't apply. Instead, I took a walk with Linda through the park that Sunday, something we hadn't done in years when weekends meant brunch rush and clogged prep lists and aching knees. We stopped for ice cream like we were kids, and she asked me what I was going to do next. "I don't know," I said. "But whatever it is, it's going to be mine." Because here's the thing no one tells you about getting fired. If you survive the shame, if you keep your hands clean and your memory sharp, the world has a funny way of reminding you who you really are. And me? I wasn't just a line cook or a kitchen manager or a guy with 23 years of calluses and no title to show for it. I was a craftsman. I was a builder. I was the reason that place ever had a reputation worth burning. Some people said I went too far, that I could have warned them, that I should have turned the other cheek or stayed loyal even after they weren't. But loyalty's a two-way street, and mine isn't blind. I didn't take anything from them that wasn't already broken. I just stopped holding it together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.